And we're here uniquely because this is a part of Hudson Bay where the sea ice in the summer lasts longest, and it's a place where the sea ice in the fall comes back the quickest. And so polar bears in this part of the world get off the ice here predictably, and they're on shore. So we have around 850 to 900 polar bears that are adjacent to a town of about the same size, about 900 people. And so that's why we choose to be in Churchill and use that as a broadcasting platform to talk to all of you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming and for being in. I mean, you're not in a place that's easy to get to, and I'm curious. So, the research station that's going on there, what's the weather like? What are you guys seeing when you look out your window right now?
Sure. So this year, we're lucky to have what I call a normal year. It's getting cold quickly, and it's getting cold early. So last night we had the second blizzard of our season. Temps plummeted probably by a good 10 to 15 degrees. And we're seeing both freshwater and now seawater start to turn to ice, and shore-fast ice forming just here to the north of where we are, and bears starting to go out on that ice. And so that's fantastic. What we're seeing in the longer term, though, is anything but that. Basically, with a warming Arctic and a warming climate, we're seeing more bad years than we are seeing normal years. We're seeing more years where bears are on shore for longer periods of time, not shorter or what we'd call average. And so across the Arctic, this is true not just here in Hudson Bay, but we're seeing polar bears spend more time on shore and closer to people.
So when you say they're longer off the ice, like so they would. Why is it important that they go onto the ice? I mean, I prefer. I like to go skating, but I kind of like to stay off the ice. You might slip, you might fall. So why is it important that they go onto the ice?
Sure, great question. Polar bears are ice obligate, or what we call ice-dependent species. They've evolved for a life on the sea ice. If they could, they would stay on the sea ice always. They would not come ashore because that's where their prey is. Polar bears have evolved to specialize on marine mammals, particularly ice seals and particularly ringed seals. They've evolved at the genetic level to metabolize fat, marine mammal fat, very efficiently. They can eat a seal, and 90% of the fat that they eat from that seal will go right into their body and become polar bear fat there. So it's a very unique adaptation. It's a very, very high calorie food source. And you can imagine if you're living outside in this incredibly cold, windy environment, you need those calories to make it through the dark, cold winter. And so that's why they're mostly out on the sea ice. It's also where they find mates, it's where they breed, and it's where they raise their young. So the sea ice is absolutely critical to polar bears, and that's why they want to get out there.
Yeah, so Doctor, I'm going to pass this off to our students here in a second, but I just have one quick question. And I mean, is it really a big matter? I mean, they're off of the ice for what, like a few extra days a year? Is that kind of the difference? And why is it so important? Are they really off the ice for that long? And how much is it different from what it normally is? Oh, we got you. You're muted.
We're seeing here in Hudson Bay, bears staying 2 to 3 weeks on shore longer. It's true in other parts of the Arctic in the south, southern Beaufort Sea, and the Chukchi Sea as well. And that stretches out the time they have to fast on the fall winter end. So where we are now in the spring summer end, it shortens the time they have to catch seals. And that spring summertime is absolutely critical for polar bear feeding. It's what we call a time of hyperphagy, or sort of like mass feeding. That's when they're putting on much of the weight that'll carry them through the year. So when that is shortened even by a week or two, polar bears will come ashore in poor condition. Females that are pregnant or about to become pregnant will not have the reserves they need to reproduce or to successfully raise their cubs. And that's been quantitatively shown here, as we're seeing polar bears come ashore, over the past 30 years in lighter body weight. Those females are having fewer cubs. We used to see triplets here with regularity. They haven't been seen since 1996. In this part of the world, that's a sign of that declining productivity. And we're seeing fewer cubs survive across most years.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for clarifying that. Now, I know I don't want to take any more questions because we have youth from literally every continent on the planet besides South America that are here that would love to talk to you. So to do that, and remember our friends in India, feel free to type those questions away. We'll get them. We're going to start with some friends in Ontario, in Brampton, Ontario, actually. So Brampton, do you guys have a question for our friends at Polar Bears International? So again, Brampton, Ontario, go ahead. Do you have a question? Go ahead.
We were wondering if any of this affected the polar bear population or the seal population.
So we're wondering, does that affect the polar bear population or the seal population? Back to you, PBI.
So we barely heard the question, but it sounds like they were also asking if the changes we're seeing, the warming and the changes in sea ice are also affecting the seal population. If that's the question, the answer is absolutely yes. We know less about seal numbers, but we know ring seals and bearded seals are also dependent on the sea ice, both for their food, their prey. They mostly are eating ring seals, at least polar cod, that live on the plankton and algae that's underneath that sea ice. But they also use the sea ice to pup successfully. So they're using sea ice and snow layers to have their young and to protect them from polar bears there. And we're seeing changes in different parts of the Arctic, places like Svalbard, Norway, where on the western side of those islands, and this is since about 2006, there's been no ice anymore year round, except maybe a little bit of shelf ice near glaciers. And so seals in that area have far fewer places to pup. The places that they do have don't have any snow anymore. So seals are just pupping out on the bare ice. Those pups aren't making it. A lot of predators have access. It makes them very vulnerable. So we are seeing dramatic changes too with the seal populations.
All right, thank you so much. Let's go now to our friends in Hyderabad in India. Their question is, can they be made to survive without any ice? Is there something that can't they just evolve to just live without ice?
They can't. Everything we know about polar bears tells us that they've evolved to become these specialized obligate predators over 300,000 to up to 1 million years ago. So they had a very long time to become what we know today as the polar bear. And the change we're seeing now is happening at such a rapid rate. So far higher than what would be happening naturally, that sort of background warming and cooling that's gone on for as long as the planet's been around. And so the thought is that they don't have time to truly adapt to a terrestrial lifestyle. The other side of that is there's not a food resource of that quality that they need, that's rich in the fats that they need to get through the winter and to put on fat themselves on land. It just doesn't exist. There is no land ring seal to replace the ring seal out on the ice.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. York. Thank you in Hyderabad as well. Let's go now a little bit further to the east to our friends in Taiwan. Taiwan, do you have a question that you'd like to ask? And as Taiwan is unmuting their microphone, Dr. York, our friends in India wanted to say thank you for answering their question. So, yeah.
Yeah, we have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Taiwan.
Go ahead. Is the question have to be related to polar bears?
Nope. I mean, when it comes to climate change, I'm sure. I mean, Dr. York has a specialty in and around that area, but feel free to ask away, and if you can't answer, you'll say no. But go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Some of the developed countries may think helping developing countries to develop their country in eco-friendly way gets no benefit. What do you think what do you think is a proper way to make those developed countries takes action and offers help?
Dr. York, it's an interesting question because it's certainly maybe not your field of research, but it's a reality that we're dealing with here at COP, right? What's in it? What's in it for me in Canada? You know, us Canadians, we like to build our pipelines and burn our oil. What's in it for me to help those developing countries?
Sure. I mean, I guess the big answer to me is we're facing a global problem with climate change. This isn't the fault of just one country. It's not going to be fixed by just one country. So it's everybody coming together with solutions across a number of areas to fix the problem that we're facing, the polar bears are facing, that you and I are facing where we live. And so I think it's critical that more countries that have more resources, whatever those might be, are able to help out those who have fewer. And I think, you know, an example of this might be some of the recent storms we've seen in the Caribbean, where places were, you know, just decimated by these severe, and some might say unusual in number of severe hurricanes, and knocked out things like power grids. Is this a chance for us to come in and put in more sustainable power systems and help maybe showcase smaller economies as sustainable energy sources that could teach us lessons as well? So I see it as a give and take there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Great question, Taiwan. Let's hop on now down to our friends in Virginia. Hello, Virginia. Do you guys have a question that you would like to ask of Dr. York?
I'll unmute you.
Okay.
There we go. You're good to go.
Hi. I like to say, is there any transitional sheltering for them, like a facility or another location where they could go so they can like prosper or something like that? And that way they don't die off because of our own faults.
And I would say with that, kind of playing on a phrase we use in the climate discussion, is there is no planet B for ourselves. And in the same sense, there's no plan B for polar bears. They're an Arctic and ice obligate species. Could they live in the Antarctic? Sure, for a short period of time, but it would be an ecological disaster for the species that live there today. Polar bears would roll in and find very naive native wildlife like penguins and Weddell seals and things like that that aren't used to having a land predator. And so they would just decimate natural populations of those native species in places like Antarctica. So really there is no other place. It's us taking action today, you know, through meetings like the one that's happening right now in Bonn to fix the climate problem. That's what we need to do.
Now, Dr. York, but I've heard about like some eggs and maybe I know that brown bears eat a lot of vegetation. Can't the polar bears kind of adapt a little bit and be more like the other bears?
No, the short answer is no. And it gets back to calories, both the amount and the type. So one way to think of polar bears isn't as much that they're obligate carnivores. It's almost more that they're obligate lipivores. They're fat eaters. They rely on that marine mammal fat to really get in the body condition they need, both to stay out on the ice year round. Most polar bears, unless they're pregnant, don't den. They're out active all winter, out looking for food. And then the ones that do den, you know, are fasting for a long period of time. So they really need to fatten up and be healthy. And marine mammals are the only way they can successfully do that in this environment. And on the other side of that, in much of the Arctic, there's another bear that lives on shore that already occupies that niche. It's the barren ground grizzly bear. It's the smallest of the brown bears, and it's the smallest for a reason. There's just not as much to eat on shore. So these small bears are defending large home ranges to get the calories they need, and they're more adapted to an omnivorous lifestyle, so they can take advantage of pretty much anything they can find, from, you know, digging up insects and small mammals to taking things like, you know, small caribou and things like that.
All right, great, thank you. So let's go on now to our friends in St. Francis Xavier in Edmonton. St. Francis, do you have a question? And after St. Francis, if you want to make your way right up to the microphone so we don't lose time, guys, we're almost out of time here. After St. Francis, we're going to hear from St. Gabe. If you want to text a question in, that's great. Ghana, our friends at Ghana, if you want to get ready at your microphone, because then you'll be up as well. So let's go back. St. Francis, do you have a question for Dr. York?
Yes, we do. We were wondering that since the globe is warming up at the rate that it is now, in the years like projecting forward, how would that like affect the population of polar bears? Would they be extinct soon in a few years, or how long do you think it would take with the way we're going now?
Great question there. What we anticipate if we stay on the same path we're on now. So if we do nothing, is we will have far fewer bears in far fewer places by mid to end of this century. However, if we do take action, if we do reduce our emissions, one thing we know, which is very hopeful on the polar bear scene, is that sea ice responds relatively quickly within about 5 years of changes in atmospheric CO2 levels. And so sea ice could stabilize pretty quickly after we peak globally and start to come off of that peak, which will give polar bears a much better chance of surviving and thriving to the end of this century and beyond.
Great, thank you. Great question. And encouraging, actually. I mean, sometimes there's a whole lot of doom and gloom, but to see something that could have that fast of a turnaround. Let's go on now to our friend. So St. Gabe, I'm looking for a question online from you. I'll come back to that later if you want to ask it. But let's hop now down to our friends in Africa and Ghana. Ghana, do you have a question for Dr. York?
Guys. Hi.
Hi. Good to see you, Ghana. Thanks for joining us. Okay, go. We're ready for that question.
Okay, so we wanted to ask that how often are they actually supposed to be on land, and how great is the impact of their extended stay on land?
Good question.
I think I got most of that. So in most of the Arctic, historically, polar bears don't come on shore at all, or very rarely. Hudson Bay, where we are, has always been a little bit unique in that the sea ice here has always melted out in the summer, but it used to be for a fairly short period of time. We know now through energetic studies of bears both here and in the Beaufort Sea north of Alaska, that polar bears can stay on shore for about 180 days, plus or minus a few, before they start seeing what we'd call passing through a threshold energetically and having negative issues around survival. So beyond that 180 days, you'd start to see bears that are really young, so cubs and dependent animals, start to have trouble surviving, and you start to see older or sick and injured polar bears having trouble surviving. So that's kind of the magic mark right now, is around 180 days on shore. I think here in 2015, we were up to 177 days on shore. So that's not good for these bears.
Holy smokes. So they're right. I mean, that's right on the cusp. Like 170. You know what? If I miss lunch, I'll tell you, I'm not a very pleasant person to be around. I think if I miss 118 hours and I would be done. 118 days, that's incredible. Okay, sorry. All right, let's go on now.
No, I mean, they have,
go ahead.
Oh no, they just have an amazing ability to fast, but they also, on the flip side of that, they have an amazing ability to be what we would call technically obese, very fat and happy bears, but also to be fat and healthy bears. They kind of debunk the myth in humans that you can be really heavy and healthy. In bears, that's not the case. They can be.
Good times. All right, thanks so much, Doctor. Let's go on now. Our last of our interactive sites, and we got to wrap up. We're already over time. Queen Elizabeth High School, do you have a question that you'd like to ask?
Go for it, Charlie.
Hi, you've spoken a lot about polar bears. I'm curious about what your position is in the organization.
So tell us, Doctor, what's your job? What do you do? We'd like to learn a little bit about you. You know what? Not only that, could you tell? I know you got to go, but tell us when you were in high school, because these are high school students across the planet, every continent here. How did you get to where you're doing, and did you know if you were going to do it in high school?
So when I was your age, I had no idea that this was even a possibility. It was not on my radar screen at all for a career. Working in the Arctic, didn't even think about it. So it was very much a matter of chance to some extent. So for me, my pathway was going to Alaska after I graduated from university, and then just being in an Arctic area, kind of falling in love with northern places and northern people, and that leading to some doors opening up, being really flexible. So taking jobs that required you to be away from family and friends for long periods of time in cold, wet, windy places, cramped quarters. Not unlike some of the work we do up here where we're on pretty small vehicles with a lot of people over long periods of time and away from family and friends. But just getting that experience out in the field eventually led me to work on Arctic marine mammals and polar bears there. But with PBI, I'm their Senior Director of Conservation, so I oversee all of our research and science-related projects. I also oversee all of our policy and management engagement there. This is my 26th year of working in the Arctic and my 20th year of working on polar bears specifically.
Boys, oh boys. Doctor, you know what? Our time is done. I just want to thank you so much for sharing your time with us. Before we go, do you have any, because sometimes I got to admit that it's going to be a little sad, be a little depressing, to tell you the truth. What words do you have for us in order to spur us on? And to and what do you have to leave us with before we head out today?
Sure. I mean, I'm very hopeful, even though I work in an area where warming is happening 2 to 3 times faster than the rest of the planet. We're really seeing it up here. So when I started working in the Arctic in 1991 in Alaska, in the north, the sea ice in the summertime never left sight of the shore. So we would be out in boats in and around sea ice all summer long. When I go there now as an adult, the sea ice is 400 miles offshore. That's a huge change. If you think about a forest where you are receding 400 miles or losing that much of any kind of habitat, a grassland, it's absolutely stunning to see. But what gives me hope are you and people like you that are keen, that understand that we're facing a real threat, understand that it's global in nature, understand that we have to come together to fix it, and are engaged in something like the Bonn climate meetings that are happening right now. You know, some of the news I saw coming into the meetings were 39 countries have already peaked and their emissions that are coming down. That's fantastic. When I look and see the news around the world of the adoption of clean energy that's happening, you know, across sectors and across countries, China taking the lead, that's fantastic. So I have a lot of hope that we are turning it around and that we are waking up to the urgency of the matter, and we're starting to take actions. So good on all of you for being engaged and being part of the solution.
Brilliant. Dr. York, thank you so much for sharing your time. Polar Bears International, thank you for sharing your time. Ladies and gentlemen, you may or may not know this, but this global delegation of youth, which is the largest synthesis of youth opinion on climate change, right? Thousands and thousands of youth all across the planet have collaborated over the last 6 months to present a paper, which these young people, some of them who you met today, are going to be sitting beside the president of the UN, of COP23, the president of COP24, the undersecretary for the UNFCCC. That one, the lady that you met from Kenya, she's going to sit and co-present on behalf of the youth of the planet. And this is happening in part because of the sponsorships of Polar Bears International, right? And so thank you, Polar Bears International, for helping make this happen. Thank you, Dr. York, for your research, the inspiring words that you have to say. And young people, let's show them. You know what? Let's show those, show guys like me, old farts like me, how to get it done. And we could follow Decarbonize and the work that's going to be published here next week, tomorrow actually, and look into how you can work with organizations like Polar Bears International to help save the ice and save them, do the amazing work that they're doing alongside them. Without any further ado, wish you all a fabulous morning, evening, afternoon, whatever it happens to be on your side of the planet. We look forward to seeing you all again soon. In 2 days, we're going to the top of a glacier in the Canadian Rockies. We'd love to have to join you there. But thank you again. Dr. York, thanks so much. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, polar bears. Goodbye, Taiwan. Goodbye, Ghana. Goodbye, Nigeria. Goodbye, India. Goodbye, Red Deer. Goodbye, Edmonton. Goodbye, Georgia, Brampton, Virginia.
Bye. Thank you.
Goodbye. Goodbye. Wonderful having y'all here. Have a great day. Goodbye, St. Gabriel's. Yeah, and bye. That's right. We'll see you soon, everybody. Come join us the day after tomorrow. We're going to the top of some mountains. Mountain climbing. That's right.